Have you ever wondered, does God exist? Have you ever looked at the world around you and thought to yourself, was this created or evolved? Are rocks really millions of years old? Did dinosaurs roam the world not too long ago? Is there evidence for a worldwide global flood? Is the Bible reliable? Is it accurate? Is it true? Join us now for this episode of The Evidence.
Good evening and welcome to our third presentation of the Evidence Seminar. I'm so glad you're here. The Evidence Seminar looks at some of life's biggest questions. Night number one, we looked at, does God exist? Evidence in the universe from physics, cosmology, astronomy. Last night, we came right back down here to planet Earth to look for evidence on this planet for where life came from. And tonight, we're going to be looking all up and down the animal kingdom to discover evidence that either supports intelligent design or evolution. So the evidence looks at these big life questions. So last night, in DNA by Design, we looked at Darwinian evolution, and we discovered that Darwinian evolution really depends on something called the evolutionary tree. And the evolutionary tree basically states or illustrates that all animal life forms eventually, if you go back in time, come to a single-celled organism from which everything else evolved. Darwin was able to describe how things may have evolved from this single-celled organisms, how birds and reptiles and beavers and plants and animals and all life on planet Earth might have evolved from that single-celled organism. But the real challenge was to describe how that single-celled organism came into being in the first place. We discovered last night that what you need for a single cell to live, to function, to carry on its activities are proteins. Proteins are the necessary building blocks of life. And proteins can't be formed by chance. There is not enough time in all the universe, not enough seconds in all the universe for a protein to be sequenced by chance. It just doesn't happen. And so the majority of scientists, biologists today, believe that in order for proteins to exist, you have to have the information in DNA. After all observable evidence of how proteins are formed on planet Earth, and up until this point, anywhere in the universe, proteins are formed through the information in DNA. So really, as Bernard Olaf Cooper says, that the problem of the origin of life is basically a problem of the origin of biological information. How did that information get in DNA? If you can explain how that information got into DNA, then you will be able to explain how proteins are formed and how life was formed on planet Earth. There's only one known source of information, and that is intelligence. And we concluded last night by coming to the conclusion that intelligence, an intelligent being or an intelligent source, must have placed or written or coded the information into DNA in the first place. Today, or tonight, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the evidence that shows that the evolutionary theory is a theory in crisis. We're going to go from the single-celled organism all the way up the evolutionary tree and see the evidence from birds, insects, mammals, reptiles, all the way up. We'll also look at some shocking lies that are still included in many textbooks, in some textbooks today. Now, the Darwinian evolutionist view of life is this, the evolutionary tree. All branches eventually lead back to one common ancestor for all life. All life is related and is evolving from a lower form up to a higher form of life. Contrary to this, or the other option to an evolutionary view, is the intelligent design view. And the intelligent design view, instead of viewing all life in a single tree, views life in an orchard of trees. In the intelligent design view, there are distinct kinds of life forms that can produce variety, but cannot transform into different kinds. All variety can be traced back to a single kind and no further. An intelligent designer, God, created different kinds of creatures and the ability to display variation within the kinds. But that variation has limits or boundaries. So in the intelligent design theory or model, you have creatures that can display various characteristics and can adapt and can change slightly, but those changes have definite boundaries or limits. In other words, you can have the dog tree or the dog family. You can have the primate family. You can have the humankind family. And within those families, you have all sorts of different characteristics and all sorts of different varieties that can be displayed. But there's limits. The dogs will never cross over and become primates. The primates will never cross over and become humans in this intelligent design orchard model. So those are the two competing theories, really, that are out there. You have the evolutionary model, which is the standard model right now in biology, and then you have the intelligent design model, which basically says that life forms were created and that they were created to display diversity, but that diversity has visible limits or boundaries. Just as an apple can't become an orange, so in the intelligent design view, a monkey can't become a human. So, if you're going to have an intelligent design model, these are the things that you would have to see evidence of for that model to be valid or true. Number one, an intelligent design model depends on instantaneous creation. So you should see evidence of instantaneous creation, not gradualness. Evidence that cannot be explained by a gradual or slow process. It needs to be you need to see evidence that shows an instantaneous creation. Next, you should be able to see boundaries, visible separations between species. Adaptation and variety should have observable limits. A species should be able to be observed to change or adapt up to a limit, and there should be an observable boundary to that adaptation. Thirdly, if intelligent design is a valid model, you should see complexity, specifically irreducible complexity. And what do I mean by irreducible complexity? What I mean by irreducible complexity, and this is related to instantaneous creation, that there's interdependent parts. And the interdependent parts in a creature all have to be there at the same time, or you cannot have a living, functioning creature, or you cannot have a functioning part to that creature. So irreducible complexity does not allow for gradual, slight changes of individual parts. All parts must be present at one time. So that is something you should see if the intelligent design model is true. And lastly of all, you should see evidence of design. Organisms should display designed attributes if the intelligent design model is valid. Now, what are the limits of the evolutionary model? Listen to the limits that Darwin himself placed on his theory. He said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. He continues by saying, natural selection acts only by taking advantage of slight, successive variations. She can what? Never. She can never take a great and sudden leap. but must advance by short and sure, those slow steps. I like to call those baby steps. Natural selection is scrutinizing the slightest variations, rejecting those that are bad, and preserving and adding up all that are good. So in an evolutionary model, here are the things that you should see as evidence that evolution is true. You should, number one, see deep time. And we talked about this last night from Charles Lyell's book. Deep time basically states that you need more than a few years, a few hundred years, or even a few thousand years. In order for evolution to work, you need lots and lots and lots of time, because you need lots and lots and lots of small, slight changes. And those slight changes gradually build up into larger changes over a vast amount of time. So you need time, lots of time, to have gradual change. The second thing that you need is baby steps. Only slight modifications are allowed. You can't have evidence of big complex parts suddenly appearing. You need slight changes all adding up in order for evolution to work, because that's the mechanism through which evolution works. Slight, small changes. Third, you need life. This may seem obvious, but the changes can't result in death. If the change results in death, that's the end road for evolution at that point, because evolution requires life for the information to be passed on. So the changes can't result in death. And the last thing, evolution depends on reproduction. Organisms must be able to reproduce. So if you produce an organism that's slightly changed from its parent organism, but it is sterile and cannot reproduce, then evolution cannot carry those changes forward any further. An example of that would be a mule, right? A donkey and a horse together producing maybe a mule. Okay, so now we're going to look from the single-celled organism all the way up the animal kingdom and look at evidence that supports the points that I listed for intelligent design, or the points I listed for the evolutionary theory. And the perfect place to start is really bacteria. Bacteria should be able to prove evolution correct. Why? And here's why. Evolution depends upon slight changes or mutations in genes. And those slight mutations in genes have to occur over many thousands of generations before you can get larger changes. The reason why bacteria is the perfect organism to prove or disprove evolution is because bacteria allows us to see many, many generations over a short period of time. Bacteria can reproduce every 20 to 30 minutes. Imagine if human beings reproduced every 20 to 30 minutes. We would have a lot of baby human beings around here. 20 to 30 minutes. Scientists can observe mutations over thousands of generations. So in a short period of time, we can really see if a bacteria is changing or mutating into something different or new. Now, this caught the eye of Michigan State University evolutionary biologist Richard Linsky and some of his colleagues, who searched for signs of evolution in bacteria for 20 years. They carefully recorded the mutations and the generations of over 40,000 generations of bacteria. 40,000 different generations of bacteria. Now, if you were to record that same sort of process in human beings, let's say that every generation had a child at 20 years of age. 40,000 generations would be 800,000 years of information. So almost 1 million years of information now we can see at a glimpse with these bacteria, or in 20 years with these bacteria. What happened with these mutations? Well, the mutations, none of the bacteria evolved into new bacteria. The mutations simply left the bacteria degenerated or dead. And the reason why is because mutations never add new information. Mutations can only work on pre-existing information in the DNA. And so what mutations can do is it can take away the information, it can reallocate the information to a new place in the genetic code, so splice it out here and insert it over here. It can switch the information around, but it can't introduce new information into the genetic code. So what ended up happening was no new bacteria was formed. Alan Linton of the University of Bristol, professor there, emeritus of bacteriology, had this to say about these experiments. Throughout 150 years of the science of bacteriology, there is no evidence that one species of bacteria has changed into another, in spite of the fact that populations have been exposed to potent chemical and physical mutagens. Since there is no evidence for species changes between the simplest forms of unicellular life, it is not surprising that there is no evidence for evolution throughout the whole array of higher multicellular organisms. What is Dr. Linton saying? He's basically telling us that there's no evidence in the whole history of bacteriology for evolution, and there's no evidence all the way up the evolutionary tree for what we would expect to see in major changes. Now, we do see adaptation. We do see slight changes. We do see species making slight changes, adapting to their environment. However, those, as we'll see, not only with the bacteria, but with further animals or life forms, those changes have observable limits. Now, one machine in bacteria that seems to defy evolution is the bacterium flagellar motor. Howard Burge has labeled this cellular machine as the most efficient motor in the universe. It spins at 10,000 rotations per minute. That's really fast. And it can stop the spinning of its little tail within a quarter of a turn, shift, and instantly begin spinning that thing at 1,000 rotations, or 10,000 rotations per minute. Again, there are 40 different protein parts that all must be present, functioning together for this thing to work. If any one of those parts is missing, the whole machine becomes useless, falls apart. This is what we call irreducible complexity. All the parts have to be present in order for this to be a functioning machine. Why would or how would evolution retain something like a flagellar motor that is evolving one part at a time? You have to have all the parts there present to start with, or you have a useless machine. And as Charles Darwin said, natural selection is scrutinizing the slightest variations, rejecting those that are bad, and preserving and adding up all that are good. In other words, if it's useless, if it's bad, if it doesn't get this life form forward, rejected. It's thrown away. It's a useless piece. So if you get one part of that bacteria flagellar motor and you don't get all the parts, it becomes a useless part. And evolution would not retain something such as this. So we can see that even within single-celled organisms, there are huge problems that an evolutionary model cannot explain. Let's move up the chain to insects and spiders and see what we can observe there. The next thing, probably all of us are familiar with, are fruit flies. These are the little creatures that dive bomb your bananas. Now, fruit flies, like bacteria, provide a unique opportunity to study evolutionary changes because fruit flies also reproduce very, very quickly, and you can observe thousands of generations in a short period of time. In 1980, the search for the proof of the theory of evolution led researchers to painstakingly and purposefully mutate each core gene of the fruit fly. The authors won a Nobel Prize in 1995 for their work, showing that mutations could affect specific body parts. They were able to take the wings and move the wings to the forehead. They were able to get fruit flies to grow legs out of their back. They were able to shift the information around in the genetic code but they were never able to add new information. And the mutations could only go so far. Once they reached whatever limit it was, the fruit flies didn't mutate into something new or something different. They just died. This showed how mutations have limits. Creatures have limits to how far they can mutate or adapt or change. Now, does this support an evolutionary model, or does this support an intelligent design model? The intelligent design model, remember, shares that life is like an orchard of trees. And the orchard has, although there's diversity within each tree, there's visible limits to how much diversity can be expressed within a single tree. You can't get the fruit from one tree jumping onto the fruit of another tree. Each tree is diverse, but still unique. The next amazing creature that we're going to look at tonight is butterflies. Not only are they amazing in their flight and the beautiful patterns on their wings, but especially how they reproduce. And reproduction is an essential element for evolution. But the butterfly presents a unique challenge to evolution. The reproduction of butterflies begins with the laying of an egg. And the butterflies will only lay their eggs on a specific host plant. So a butterfly, in order to identify this specific host plant, will fly around once it thinks that it's located the specific plant that it wants to lay its eggs on. It will flutter around the plant and measure the size of the leaves. Then it will land on the plant. It will drum the leaves with its feet. It will taste and smell the plant, and once it's absolutely sure that this plant is the right plant, it will lay its eggs. And the reason why it has to be absolutely sure is because if the butterfly lays its eggs on the wrong plant, its baby, the caterpillar that hatches from it, will not be able to live. It will die, because the caterpillar only will eat the specific leaves of that specific plant. If the eggs are laid on a wrong plant, the caterpillar will hatch, won't eat, and will die. So it has to get it right the first time. Now, once the eggs hatch, a caterpillar comes out and immediately begins to eat. It can eat up to its own body weight every single day in food. It multiplies its birth weight more than 3,000 times in 2 weeks. I'm glad my kids don't grow that fast. 3,000 times. And in order to accommodate this growth, the caterpillar has to have a very unique skin, a skin that is both waterproof to keep it from drying out and dying, but also a skin that is stretchy enough that it can accommodate rapid growth, and a skin that can eventually be shed and a new layer of skin formed underneath. So the caterpillar will shed its skin several times before it enters the chrysalis stage. Now, caterpillars have two types of cells in their bodies. They have what are called larval cells, and these are the cells that make up the body and internal organs of the caterpillar. But there's a second set of cells inside the caterpillar called the imaginal cells. And the imaginal cells are placeholders for what will eventually become the butterfly. They're dormant. They don't do anything. They just kind of sit there inside of the caterpillar. But eventually, those are the cells that will become the wings and the antenna and the long articulate legs of the beautiful butterfly once it exits from the chrysalis. So every caterpillar has two complete body plans for two totally different creatures contained within it. Now, at some point, the caterpillar knows that it's time to begin its most dramatic transformation. So the caterpillar finds a spot, either on the bottom of a twig or a leaf. It spins an anchor, attaches itself to that anchor, and then begins to pump a fluid into its body. That fluid builds up right underneath the underlayer of its skin until finally its skin splits. And that fluid begins to harden and form a chrysalis around the caterpillar. Now, the amazing thing is what happens inside this chrysalis. The caterpillar turns into a butterfly. Now, a caterpillar and a butterfly are two totally separate creatures. The caterpillar is earthbound. eats plants, has a large body with short little chubby legs, has very limited vision and very limited smell. But what exits the chrysalis is very different from what went in the chrysalis. A butterfly isn't earthbound, it can fly. It doesn't eat plants, it drinks nectar. It doesn't have a large, chubby body, it has a thin, slender body with long, articulate legs. Instead of limited vision and limited smell, it has exceptional vision and exceptional smell, and can navigate and fly 50 miles in a day while a caterpillar is tied to the little plant that it was born on, right? The caterpillar and the butterfly are two totally different creatures. Now, once inside this chrysalis, the caterpillar begins to digest its own cells. It literally turns its own body into cellular soup. This is called pre-programmed cell death, or apoptosis. And it has to die. It has to destroy what made up the body structure of the caterpillar, because if it doesn't destroy the body structure of the caterpillar, you're not going to be able to produce the totally novel structure of the butterfly. Now, the problem here is that if you're destroying your entire body structure in this chrysalis, you only have one chance of making it through the chrysalis. If you mess up, you're toast, right? You have to make it through that chrysalis stage in one go. Now, think about this. What tells the caterpillar inside the chrysalis which cell needs to be destroyed? And what tells the caterpillar which cell needs to be preserved? This is all genetically pre-programmed into the caterpillar before it goes into the chrysalis. And it has to be, the information has to be there before it goes into the chrysalis, or that caterpillar is not going to make it out alive. If you destroy the wrong cells, you come out with a butterfly that, let's say, has no wings, or has no legs, or has no proboscis, which is the long straw-like tongue that a butterfly has. You have to get it all right the first time, or you have a big fail for evolution. Now, once all of this is accomplished and the new butterfly has exited the chrysalis, there's still one final problem the butterfly has to conquer before it can survive. Its straw-like tongue is split down the middle when it comes out of the chrysalis. And before it can survive, it has to successfully piece that tongue together, fitting it perfectly together, forming a perfect straw with no air leaks, so that it will be able to eat. If it doesn't do this the first time, then you have a dead butterfly, because it will not be able to eat. All of this has to happen the first time, or you have a big fail. In order for natural selection to work, an organism has to be able to reproduce itself. Caterpillars cannot reproduce unless they make it to the butterfly stage. In between a caterpillar and a butterfly is the chrysalis, where nearly everything about a caterpillar is destroyed. That destruction has to happen because the butterfly is so radically different from the caterpillar. But unless the caterpillar can make it through this chrysalis stage on the first try perfectly, it will not survive to pass on its information to its offspring. So unless a caterpillar has the full genetic instructions needed from the beginning, you will never get a butterfly. In this whole picture here, you don't have enough time, you don't have enough wiggle room for slight and slow variation to occur. You can't evolve all the singular parts of the butterfly slowly and gradually as you're going from a caterpillar to a butterfly. Caterpillars can't reproduce. You have to go through the chrysalis. Everything has to be there instantaneously the first time. Nothing about this transformation fits evolution. You can't have long periods of time to try and retry to make a butterfly, because the death will result. As we looked at before, life is the necessary ingredient for evolution to work. Reproduction is also necessary. Slight modifications would only result in the death of the butterfly. However, in an intelligent design model, if a butterfly was instantly created with all the genetic information it needed, it could transition smoothly from caterpillar to butterfly, if it had all the information it needed. So this really reveals or fits an instantaneous creation. It is also irreducibly complex. You have to have all of the parts there, or you have a big fail. You won't have butterflies if you don't have all the parts there to begin with. It resembles design, not randomness. There are boundaries to how far a caterpillar can change. It will only produce butterflies. You'll never have an ant or a spider or a fox jumping out of a chrysalis. Now, the interesting thing about this is that metamorphosis is the only example on Earth of one creature transforming into a completely new creature. The very thing that evolution claims should happen over and over with every creature. And it doesn't take thousands or millions of years to occur. It happens actually quite quickly. With the right information in the genetic code, you can have an evolutionary-like change with metamorphosis in a few days. It doesn't take a large period of time. This change is only possible if the information for the change is already written into the DNA. So once again, the problem goes back to the information of DNA. If you know where the information in DNA came from, you know where life on planet Earth came from. Now, one final way that butterflies defy evolution are their migration patterns. Monarch butterflies migrate over 2,500 miles to a specific mountain range in Mexico. But how they do it is an evolutionary enigma. The reason is that the generation that migrates to this specific region in Mexico is not the same generation that left Mexico. So that generation in Mexico winters in Mexico, and then they fly to southern Texas. Once they've come to southern Texas, they lay their eggs on the milkweed there in southern Texas, and once they lay their eggs, that generation dies. The new generation hatches from their eggs, and do they go back to Mexico? No, they want to go north. So they keep on going north, and they end up in the Michigan area. And they find milkweed, and they lay their eggs, and that generation dies. And the next generation comes out of their eggs. Do you think they go back to Mexico? No. They want to become Canadian citizens, so they go up to Canada. And they lay their eggs up there in Canada, and they die. And finally, the fourth generation hatches from there, and they look at their options north, and they say, oh, that's way too cold. Let's go back to Mexico. So they turn around, and they say, let's go, guys. Now, how do they know where Mexico is? Have they ever been to Mexico? No. And yet, they perfectly navigate straight back to the very valley that their great-great-grandparents first left, without ever knowing the way. Now, this is a mystery. Perhaps science will find out how these butterflies are able to navigate. But I would like to suggest that this mystery is tied in with genetics in some way, that the information is written there somehow for the butterfly to get from Canada to Mexico in the fourth generation. In any case, it's an incredible feat for monarch butterflies. Now, the bombardier beetle is the next creature on the list. It's a half an inch long, and what makes this beetle extraordinary is its complex defense system. You see, the bombardier beetle has two chemicals in two separate chambers in its rear abdomen. When the bombardier beetle feels threatened, like it's going to be eaten by a bird or a fox or some sort of predator, it is able to mix both of those chemicals in a separate chamber and form a new chemical called benzoquinone. Benzoquinone superheats to boiling point, and that little beetle is able to fire that boiling liquid out 2 twin tubes in its rear in any direction, in front of it, in back of it, to the sides, in any direction it can fire it. Now, scientists have studied this little beetle, and they've discovered that when it fires in 3 rapid successions. But the firing is so rapid that the human ear only picks up a single pop. If that bombardier beetle had fired all of its juice in one big pop, that bombardier beetle might turn into a rocket. And land on his back, maybe be eaten, I don't know. Somehow, he knows to fire in 3 successive rounds, and that allows him to hold on so he doesn't get propelled away. Now, the bombardier dilemma is that this beetle is irreducibly complex. You need both chemicals, a firing chamber, and most importantly, an exit to have a working defense mechanism. If you evolve only one chemical, it's useless. If you evolve both chemicals but no exit, the beetle kills himself with the boiling reaction. You need all the parts there working in order for this to be a functional and advantageous defense mechanism for the beetle. So it's irreducibly complex, and again it shows that all these items needed to be there the very first time, or the initial time. They needed to be created at the same time in order for this to really work or function. Now, the chicken egg is another enigma. Chicken eggs are a wonder in and of themselves. Did you know that chicken eggs have 10,000 tiny little holes in the eggs? And that's why when you boil an egg, you see all those bubbles. That's the air coming out those pores in the chicken egg. If the shell, now all of those little pores allow the chicken to breathe while he's forming, the baby chick to breathe while he's forming, and also it allows the chicken to excrete waste out of the shell as it's forming. If the shell doesn't empty the waste quick enough, then the chicken will die, or the chick will die. If there isn't enough oxygen, the chick will die. That egg has to be perfect from the very first chicken to have ever come into an egg, or you have a dead chick. So again, irreducibly complex. It all has to be present. Now, on day number 5, the chicken has formed blood vessels, and 2 of these blood vessels go up to the edge of the egg and connect to a sac. And that's where all of the oxygen transfers into the blood vessels and feeds into the chicken. Now, on day number 19, the chick forms a little tooth on the top of its beak, right there. It's called an egg tooth. Now, that tooth is so that it can poke a little sac of air located at the bottom of the egg. From the moment it pokes into this sac of air, it has enough oxygen to last for only 6 hours. It will poke this air sac exactly on day 21, and it must break through the shell or it will die. So as soon as it pokes that air sac, has 6 hours to break out of its shell. If that baby chick had to evolve, how could that chick evolve a tooth and the first time hit the air sac and know it only had 6 hours in order to exit the egg or it would die? It needs the tiny holes in the shell, it needs blood vessels, it needs the air sac, it needs the little egg tooth all the first time it is formed or it will die. If the egg evolves pores but nothing else, the chick will die of lack of oxygen before it hatches. If its blood vessels reach the shell but no air sac is formed, or it doesn't have a tooth to break the air sac, it will die. Everything needs to be in place the first time for the chick to survive. This could only happen through an intelligent design model. Now, these birds that are up on the screen called bush turkeys, they're amazing birds. Australian incubator birds. I actually saw them when I went to Australia, went on a hike and saw these little birds running around trying to build their nests. They aren't very big. The females are 3 to 4 pounds. So they're real small, little turkeys. However, they lay big eggs for their size, 1/2 pound each. And the female will lay 1 egg every 3 days for 7 months. Now, the male bush turkey is the one responsible for constructing the nest. And it has to be built exactly to the specifications of the female turkey. If he doesn't build it exactly to the specifications of the female turkey, and she says, "I don't like it," he has to build her another nest. So he's got to get it right the first time. And it's a lot of work, because this nest is like 20 feet wide and 10 feet deep. I mean, this is a huge nest. It's actually a mound, a big mound. Now, the female will check out the nest and see if she likes it. If she's satisfied, then she'll lay her eggs inside the nest, and the eggs will be buried. Now, the eggs have a thick outer shell because these eggs need to be able to withstand the pressure of being buried. So they have a thick outer shell, and the pores in these eggs are, instead of just being round holes, they're actually ice cream cone shaped. And this is important to know because the Australian incubator bird, the chicks will, as they're growing, will actually begin to sense that they don't have enough oxygen. And so they'll rub their beaks around the inside of the shell. And as they rub their beaks on the inside of the shell, they'll wear away the inside of the shell, making those pores just a little bit bigger, letting in a little bit more oxygen, and now I can breathe. Okay, and they keep growing, and when they start struggling to breathe again, they'll start wearing away the inside of the shell until they can breathe again. And they keep doing that, and they keep doing that. Now, the eggs have to be kept a specific temperature and a specific humidity. So the male turkey is constantly checking this nest. He'll scratch away at the nest. He'll stick his beak in there, check the temperature, check the humidity. If the temperature is a little bit too high, he'll get on top of the nest and scratch away a bunch of the dirt and twigs. If the temperature is a little bit too cool, he'll scratch dirt and leaves back up onto the nest. He's constantly keeping it at an exact temperature. And the reason why is if that temperature varies by several degrees, that little chick will die. So in order to keep those chicks alive inside the eggs, he has to continually monitor the temperature in this nest. And that's what the nest looks like. Now, once the eggs have come to the place where the little birds are about ready to hatch, mama bird and daddy turkey abandon the nest. They just leave. And the little birds hatch all on their own deep down inside this nest. They spend 3 days digging on their backs to try and get out of this nest. Once they get out of the nest, they look around. Mom, Dad, nope, they're not there any longer. I'm all alone. And that little bird has to hunt, has to feed itself, has to grow, has to know how to perfectly reproduce a nest that it's never seen or never been shown how to build the first time. Mom and Dad aren't there to show him. How does he know? My theory is that the information was put there ahead of time. That little bird has the information needed for life pre-programmed in his little mind or in his DNA to be able to survive once he comes out of that nest. Otherwise, he would die. Now, the woodpecker is an amazing bird. It was designed for hammering on trees. The beak is the strongest part of any animal weight-to-body ratio. It has 2 toes, which allows it on each side of its foot, which allows it to climb in any direction, upside down and around trees. Its tail feathers are used as a stiff rocking board in order to be able to rock back on and hammer onto the trees. It has cartilage in the back of its beak to cushion the blows as it hits the trees. It opens and closes its eyes every time it hits the trees. So it will hit the tree, open its eyes, reposition, hit the tree, and you know how fast woodpeckers hammer on the trees incredibly fast. Now, all of this has to happen the first time for the woodpecker. All of this has to be there the first time for the woodpecker, or you have a big fail for the woodpecker. It all has to be there. If the beak isn't strong enough, it breaks. Woodpecker dies. If the cartilage isn't there on the back of the beak, the woodpecker receives multiple concussions. If he doesn't coordinate the opening and closing of his eyes just right as he's hammering on that tree, he ends up with a detached retina, and you have a blind woodpecker that isn't able to eat and dies. So everything has to be there the first time, right away, or you don't have a living woodpecker. Another amazing thing about woodpeckers is their tongue. Now, the woodpecker's tongue can stretch 10 inches past its beak and has a little barbed spear on the end. And that barbed spear, it will stick down into a hole and try and spear whatever bug is down inside the hole. It also produces a glue on its tongue that will aid in sticking to the bug to pull it out of the hole. Now, if that woodpecker gets that bug into its mouth, and that bug is glued to its tongue, and it tries to swallow the bug, it's going to end up swallowing the tongue, right? So that woodpecker has to have a solvent in order to dissolve the glue in its tongue. And it has just that. It produces a solvent in its mouth that dissolves the glue and allows the woodpecker to swallow the bug and go after another one. Again, we're looking at things that all have to be present the first time. If its beak isn't strong enough, it breaks. Without the cartilage behind its beak, it would receive multiple concussions. Without closing his eyes between each hit, it would be blind after the first hit. With the wrong type of glue, the bird's tongue would stick to its mouth, and without something to dissolve the glue, when the woodpecker swallows the bug, he would also swallow his tongue. All of these things have to fit together. They all have to be present, or you have a major fail. Doesn't it seem so clear that slow, gradual change cannot explain the woodpecker? It all has to be there the first time, or you have a big fail. Now, another amazing woodpecker is called the European green woodpecker. Most woodpeckers, their tongue starts in the front of their head, goes around the back of their head, and then comes right out their mouth. The European green woodpecker has a tongue that starts in the front of its throat, goes around the back of its head, down into its beak, out through a nostril, back down into its beak, and out its mouth. The most unique tongue, there's not a tongue on earth like this European green woodpecker. Where did it get that tongue if it evolved? From what creature is that tongue an evolutionary leftover from? It seems to be a novel structure, something unique just to this woodpecker. Perhaps we'll find another creature, but we haven't found another creature that has a tongue quite like this, and it seems to indicate that this woodpecker, or at least this particular woodpecker, has a unique feature that was designed unique for this bird. Another amazing creature is the Pacific golden plover. Now, these little birds live up in Alaska, and they winter or migrate down to Hawaii for the winter every year, something I would love to do each year. Now, these little birds know whether or not or where they need to go. They go on a nonstop flight, an 88-hour flight from Alaska all the way to Hawaii. They burn 1 gram of body fat per hour as they're migrating. They gain 70 grams of body fat before the flight, and they need to fly in a V formation in order to preserve their energy. So they fly in a V formation, Because if you only gain 70 grams, you burn 1 gram per hour, and it's an 88-hour flight, you're going to use up all your fuel before you get there. So you have to fly more efficiently. V formation, they fly a little bit more efficiently, and they're able to use just the 70 grams before they get to Hawaii. Now, they lay their eggs before they take off. The young hatch, and the young begin to eat with their parents as their parents are eating, and they both eat at the same time. However, their parents gain 70 grams of body fat before the young do. So once the parents gain 70 grams of body fat, they take off on their journey and leave the young behind. The young continue to eat until they gain 70 grams of body fat, and then they take off. However, they've never been to Hawaii, yet they make it to the exact location that their parents are at in Hawaii. How do they know? Again, these are some things that I think about, and I attribute it to the information has to be present there already before these little chicks hatch out of their eggs. How do they know where to go? How do they know how to navigate? How do they know they need to eat 70 grams and exactly 70 grams and fly in V formation and make it? The next creature is a gecko. For centuries, scientists wondered how geckos could walk vertically, upside down on walls and ceilings so effortlessly. Well, scientists were able to magnify the foot of a gecko over 35,000 times, and they discovered not only on the feet, but all over the gecko are tiny little hairs that have a split on the end, and that split on the end of these hairs acts as a suction cup that sticks to flat surfaces. And that's how the gecko is able to walk up different walls. Now, the cups are so strong that if the foot wasn't designed just right, the gecko would be permanently stuck. It wouldn't be able to eat or drink. It'd just be stuck there. However, the gecko is able and knows how to pull its foot together to unpop all of the suction cups, and it can do it so rapidly that it can literally run across the ceiling. Amazing. All the information there. The gecko, with each step, pulls its toes together, popping the seals on thousands of these suction cups at once, and then resuctioning the cups the next time it lays its foot down. Now, here's an example of natural selection. Only 40% of the different species of geckos can climb walls. Not all geckos can climb walls. Evidence shows that gecko species have gained, lost, and then regained the ability to climb walls. Now, what does that show? That shows that the information is there, but it's not expressed. The information is there to be able to climb walls, to know how to climb walls. And depending on the environment, that information can be expressed or it can be not expressed. The desert gecko doesn't need to express that information. It doesn't need to climb walls. They found geckos that are encased in amber, thousands of years old, and they have the exact same hairs needed to climb walls that geckos have today. They look identical. So this is not an example of evolution. It's an example of natural selection or adaptation, meaning that species can change or adapt, but they have limits to how much change they can express. Now, the earliest discovered geckos from the time of dinosaurs all had the ability to walk up walls. Geckos can lose and regain the ability to crawl up walls. The giant ground gecko has the same hair and muscles used by wall climbing geckos, but can't climb walls. So all geckos are covered with tiny hairs that can split on their feet and adapt to wall climbing. If the information wasn't already there, the geckos wouldn't be able to climb the walls. It's information, not evolution, that explains geckos. Another amazing creature is the platypus. Now, the first time they discovered the platypus, scientists didn't think it was real. They thought somebody had taken a duckbill and sewed it onto a beaver hide. And somebody came out with scissors and realized, oh wait, this is a real creature. Now, the amazing thing about a platypus is its bill. And the bill is a unique sensory organ that can sense electrical impulses. It's not an evolutionary evolved from a duck, The bill doesn't prove evolution, but displays a unique design among animals on Earth. If you take batteries and dead shrimp and put them in a pool and you let a platypus go, it will close its eyes, close its ears, close its mouth, close its nose, and still be able to find the batteries, not the shrimp, because the shrimp are dead. So it follows the electrical impulses straight to the batteries. So that's what that bill is. It's a uniquely designed and formed part. Now, dogs are the next thing on the list. Man's best friend. There are over 700 different varieties of dogs, and those varieties of dogs don't prove that dogs are evolving into something else. Instead, it shows that through selective breeding, we can display the traits that are hidden in the information system of dogs. No new information is added. You can breed down, but you can't breed up. You can get a bulldog from a mastiff, but you can't get a mastiff from a bulldog, because information is lost. Now, you can breed a bulldog and mastiff together and get a bull mastiff. But if the information isn't already present, you can't get a new creature. It's all about information. Here's an example of a small dog body in a large dog skin. The wrinkled Shar-Pei. You can tell that if the information wasn't there already, you wouldn't have it available to express. Now, Darwin understood this, and it puzzled him, because Darwin used to breed pigeons, and he saw that he could get all sorts of different shapes and sizes and colors of pigeons, but all he ever got was pigeons. And he wondered, how come these pigeons don't evolve into something else? Well, there's boundaries. Now, at the time of Darwin, there was an admirer named Ernst Haeckel who decided to put together some drawings to support the brand new theory of evolution. However, he was discovered a fraud in 1884. He made up his drawings. Today, Haeckel's drawings are found in some science textbooks, even though he was discovered a fraud over 100 years ago. Now, for a long time, evolutionary scientists have promoted the idea that if you can live without it, it must be useless. And you've heard of vestigial organs? Well, scientists claim over 180 vestigial useless organs are left over from evolution. However, vestigial organs are useful. The appendix is an example. Scientists now know it aids our body in recovering from infections, lowers inflammation, and much, much more. Vestigial organs aren't leftovers from evolution. They're useful parts to our body. Now, another myth. Some will say we share 98% of our DNA with monkeys, so we must be part monkey. However, how much information is in that 2% that's left over? Well, that 2% represents 60 million letters of coding. 60 million letters of coding. That's a lot of informational difference. By the way, we share 50% of our DNA with bananas, but that doesn't mean we're half banana. So just because you find a correlation that we share with some other creature doesn't mean that we came from that creature. It just means that we share similar attributes or things needed for life, such as appendages to walk or to move, teeth to eat food. So as we've considered the evidence together, we've seen problems all the way up the evolutionary tree. But these very problems for evolution are easily solved by intelligent design. As Francis Crick said, biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but evolved. Darwin said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Now tonight, some of you may feel like science is being shaken out from underneath your feet. You feel like you have no place to go if evolution is not true, but you do. You can go where the evidence leads. There's a better theory that is supported by the evidence, I believe. May I kindly suggest that you ask yourself a question this evening. What ties me to evolution? What ties me? It's just a theory. What ties me to evolution? What holds me back? Why wouldn't I go where logic, where reason, where clear evidence points? And as you ponder this question, I want to tell you that you can't miss tomorrow night. There is one final dilemma that haunted Darwin until his death: the missing links in the geological column. You can't miss tomorrow night. It's entitled Fossils and the Flood. Thank you for sticking with me throughout this presentation, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow evening. Thank you.